Okay, so we have an official debate happening. We have Naman, we have Arkawip. For this debate, Naman is defending the proposition that vegans who support the supply and demand of bread are hypocrites. Arkawip is taking the opposition. As always, when we based upon who concedes, we don't get a vocal concession from either participant. We'll put it to a voting poll in which you, the audience, can decide on who you think performed better overall in the debate. There's no time limit, light moderation. You guys can get started.
Okay, so yeah, so my issue, I suppose, is with of course veganism as a whole thing, which is the hypocritical part where um of course the definition of vegan is to not eat animals, etc. And kind of we're talking about morality and ethics, etc. as well, of course. However, the main issue I have, as I say, which is like the production of crops such as rice, wheat, vegetables, even fruit, things of that sort. How small animals die, not only insects, but I'm talking about like small like mice and rats and frogs, things of that sort as well, that die within the production of um, harvesting for wheat to make bread that vegans do eat. I've had a couple, of course. I have asked a few vegans individually that I do know, and their response to that tends to be, "Well, we have to eat something," which obviously I think is a poor argument really to it. So obviously that's why I wanted to find someone who can give me a better understanding towards my view on that. And of course, yes, I wanted to kind of like understand that first, and then we can get into it a bit more.
Sure, yeah. So I just want to first start with finding what we take hypocrisy to be. So I take hypocrisy to be someone who has a moral standard and then fails to uphold it. Do you agree with that definition?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So on your view, a vegan is failing to uphold a moral standard because these animals are dying in crop deaths.
Yeah.
So what moral standard do you take vegans to hold?
I mean, obviously, the reason behind being a vegan, as I said, is the fact that you guys believe, as do I, of course, that animals have a right to live. And that's like the whole thing, of course. That's the main purpose behind veganism, or even being a vegetarian, I suppose. It's about animals not being harmed, and as you wouldn't do to a human being, you wouldn't harm a human being, other than, of course, self-defense, but that's a different story. And you guys believe that it's the same with animals, such as cows, sheep, etc. We shouldn't be using animals for our own consumption, just for food purposes. And of course, I do agree that a lot of, unfortunately, slaughterhouses do treat these animals in a horrific way. But that's of course my standpoint on that.
Sure, yeah. So I don't think that you're far off on the moral standard that vegans hold, and different vegans will have different grounding for these moral standards. I personally am a deontologist, meaning I take something like duties or obligations or rights to be what's grounding my ethics. And you mentioned animal rights, and a lot of vegans think that like an animal has a right, but I'm not totally sure that we are meaning the same thing when we say a right here. So there's a difference between an obligation I have towards an individual and then an obligation I have to achieve something for an individual. So do you see the difference between those two ideas?
Sure.
Yeah, and we can maybe use that as something like negative rights versus positive rights. I know some philosophers use that terminology, but I think for our purposes, we can talk about my duties towards other individuals versus like having to achieve some type of good for something. Now, in the case of crop deaths, this is a really important case that highlights that difference very clearly. So if we take like an animal that we're slaughtering to eat their flesh, in that case, it's very clear that we're violating our duty towards the animal because we're causing this animal to be killed just for our own means. Their body is being treated merely as a means for our goals and our good. There's no consideration for the animal's good in that case. Now, in the case of crop deaths, those animals are free. We did not create the situation where they're being bred for us or farmed for us or anything like that. And although we do hold that the animal has its own value and can seek its own good, we don't have an obligation to achieve a good for that animal. Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so with that in mind, we don't have an obligation to eliminate all crop deaths, but it would be morally good to do so. So there's a difference here between a moral obligation and what would be morally virtuous or good to do. Do you understand that difference?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so when we talk about a violation of rights, that's where we violate this thing that we have to do. But it doesn't mean that we have to fulfill this morally virtuous act, this achieving of the good for the animals. And so we can say, on the one hand, yes, it's a tragedy that crop deaths happen, but we aren't violating a moral standard that we hold when we do it. So we haven't gotten into the realm of hypocrisy here.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I get that. So you're basically talking about mainly talking about the intention of it, I suppose, to an extent, kind of knowingly, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, to a certain extent, although if we just go with attention and knowing, there is a problem with crop deaths because we know the crop deaths will kill the animal, and we do it anyways.
Right. So what's your stance? Because obviously the definition of vegan in a vegan or veganism is a person who does not eat or use animal products. I mean, that's the dictionary definition. But of course, however people want to take it, they can take it because I mean it's a different thing. It's a belief, it's a value, and it can be different for some people. I mean, obviously, to backtrack a bit, I mean, the initial question I should have asked was, why are you personally a vegan? I kind of now understand to an extent why, because you explained most what you.
Yeah, I mean, I can go in a little
Yeah.
bit about that if you'd like.
Yeah.
So from my point of view, I take it as granted that animals have an experience. There is a subject. When I look at an animal, it looks back at me. This animal is capable of seeking its own good. And so from that point of view, I take an animal to be what Kant calls an end in and of themselves. And once I recognize something as an end in and of themselves, I have certain duties towards these individuals.
So you're looking at it. So I'm guessing do you put humans and animals on the same kind of scale? Like, are they both in the same right? Do they have the same kind of rights? Obviously, I'm talking about kind of emotionally and life rather than everything else. But yeah, emotionally and life, you believe that animals and humans have the same rights and they're on the same level.
I don't actually. I don't. I make a difference between animals and humans. So, for example, I take animals to be the type of creature that gets moral consideration. However, humans I take to be the kind of creature that has this additional capacity, the ability to rationalize their position, to reflect, to have reasons, to motivate their actions. And because of that rationality, I can make claims on other humans that I cannot make on animals. So for example, I can say that another human does not have the right to violate my bodily autonomy without good reason. And we can define what those good reasons are. Like, say, if I'm violating their bodily autonomies, I'm trying to murder them, they can kill me in self-defense. We can have other things like limits of freedom of speech, say, like you're not allowed to go into a movie theater and yell fire and cause a riot and have people die. I can't make claims like that on animals, and I don't expect an animal to respond to that. So when a lion goes and kills a gazelle, I don't see that an injustice occurred because the lion is not capable of having that rationality and ability to reflect on their actions. but I do take the lion to have this capacity to experience the world, to seek their own goods. And in that sense, I have a duty not to violate their good, but I don't have a duty to achieve good for them.
Yeah, no, I do agree, because obviously with regards to an animal killing a zebra or a gazelle, as you said, a lion, something, they do it for survival reasons, they do it for food. Of course, if we're talking about kind of the logistics of it and the technical term, the technicalities of it, we're talking, I mean, we live in, like, you live in America, I imagine,
Yeah.
judging by your accent. I live in the UK, so obviously we are well aware that we are privileged to have such beliefs and go down the route of being a vegan or vegetarian. Pescatarian, I don't really think that is really much of a thing, but that's my own view. But obviously, when we're talking about such as a survival reason, if someone, like, for example, I don't know, my background being from Pakistan, I go to Pakistan, I'll see people eating meat, they're going to do their thing. But in terms of, like, if someone was to be, so what's your value, what's your views on a hunter, I suppose, in that case? Because if a hunter's doing it for for survival reason, for example, if I was a hunter, if I actually went out and hunted my own food, such as deers, for example, let's not talk about kind of like ones that can't really defend themselves too much, like sheep or something, but deers, for example, can to an extent, but they can also kind of they're not the smartest of animals, but my point being, any animal that can kind of, you could say, defend itself, and if I was to hunt it as a hunter, what's your opinion on that? Because obviously your stance is not to have anything animals consumed wise or mistreated. But then,
Yeah.
of course, there's hunters in this country. As I said, I don't need to do it because I'm not going to be surviving on that. But I would do it because I want to eat meat. But I'm a hunter, because the reason I say that is because you were talking mainly about mistreating animals, because you're talking about the morality side of things. Hence
That's
why
right.
you said about crops. Of course, mice die, insects die, etc. But they're not mistreated because they're free, you mentioned. So
Well,
obviously,
it's not just that they're not mistreated. It has to do with our obligations to those animals. So with the hunting case, I'm violating that animal's bodily autonomy. I'm taking away that right, and I'm doing so merely for my own ends, my goals. I'm treating that animal as an instrument to my good. And when I do that, I violate their own good. And I'm using their body to do so. So they become what's called merely a means to my end. And so that is an obligation that I have for individuals that I take to be an end. So the hunter is violating this moral consideration that I take to be universal in a sense. But the crop death is not violating that bodily autonomy, because I'm not using the animal's body as merely a means for my ends. It just happens to be the case that I'm defending this food that I eat, and there's collateral damage that takes place. So I'm not violating this moral standard I have, although we can talk about how it would be morally good to reduce crop deaths. And I'm on board with that. I think we should find practical ways to reduce crop deaths and all of these things, and produce crops that would be less impact on the environment overall, all of these things. I think those are all morally good. But specifically with the vegan standards, the moral standard, what would make them a hypocrite, it really is, for me, about this obligation and violating that obligation to an animal that is an end in and of itself. And we can also go a little bit into if insects are ends at all.
so I mean, you do make a good point, but that's the issue I do have, because I've heard that response and that argument several times. I think, I don't know if you've heard of a guy, a British guy on YouTube. He's quite well known, called Ed Ursuline. Yeah. So I listen to his stuff. He don't get me wrong, he's great. Like, he does talk sense. However, my question always, my partner's a vegan. I eat quite a bit of vegan food because we live together. And we I always do bring up the question of the crops where, as mentioned, insects, etc. You saying, obviously, just to clarify, is what you're basically saying is that we're not actually using the animals to eat the animals directly, basically, in simplest of terms. Is that
In
what
a
you're
way,
trying to,
but more than
right?
that, we're not using their body. We're not violating their rights in order for our goods to be achieved. It just
Sure.
happens
Yeah.
to
No.
be the case. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get that and I appreciate that. However, for that's where the issue stands, in my opinion, which is,
Mhm.
of course, yes, directly in that case, you're not kind of like grabbing a cow, cutting it, and using it for its leather and obviously meat, etc. However, we as people, we know, I mean, we've got common sense. We've got enough common sense to know that when the bread that is produced and that the bread is consumed by us, well, as by vegans mainly, you know, obviously, what to an extent what the process of that is. You know that okay, the wheats are going to get harvested, etc., and within that there is thousands and thousands of insects, and there are mice and frogs, etc. You know they're dying. I know you're not directly eating them. However, you know that they are dying. So for me to, for example, if I was to see, you could say, if I was to see a spider, right?
Mhm.
I crushed it. And I saw it and I crushed it because I wanted to crush it. I mean, what would your opinion on that be? Would that be violating the spider's rights?
Why did you crush it? Like,
I
was the
mean,
spider biting you? Because if a spider is biting
no,
me, it's not I don't see that as a violation. I see that as a self-defense
sure.
case.
Yeah, so that's the difference. So self-defense is completely different. Completely
Right.
different. I can
So you
completely
just
appreciate that.
see a spider and you're scared of the spider. I don't see
Right.
that as a good reason
For
to.
my own pleasure. For my own pleasure,
Yeah,
let's say,
yeah,
right?
that would be wrong on my view.
Okay, so
Mhm.
what is consuming bread? The reason you eat bread, let's be honest, we don't do it for survival reasons because there are alternatives to eating bread, especially in these countries that we, UK, US.
Mhm.
You to eat bread, do you believe that you're privileged to eat bread?
I mean, I believe I'm privileged to eat all kinds of food that I eat.
But let's
Just the fact that we have farming, I find that to be a privilege.
right. So okay, so to eat fruit, to eat vegetables, rice,
Mhm.
bread, things of that sort,
Right.
that's all a privilege, meaning it's pleasure. It's a pleasure, really. Technically, it's pleasure.
Well, yes. Okay. So maybe we can differentiate here. There is a pleasure aspect, right? But there's a difference between something being merely a pleasure and then also having these multiple uses. And there's also a difference with these things having pleasure and there being victims involved. And when I say victim, I mean the type of creature where this right has been violated, where our obligations to them have been violated. So maybe I can answer this question that you have in the realm of achieving the good for animals, because it seems to be something you're concerned with. Like, the consequences of the crop deaths are very bad. And I agree that we should move towards reducing crop deaths and all of these things, but I don't agree that it's a moral obligation. I do think it's morally good. So just so that delineation is on the table. So with the consequences aspect, you're saying that the crop deaths are bad, and because there's animals that will suffer and harm will come to them, and bread is one of those things that leads to crop deaths. Now, if crop deaths are bad and it is something we should reduce, do you grant that it's impossible to get rid of crop deaths?
well, yeah. I mean,
Okay,
of
cool.
course.
So
I
we
mean, well,
agree
actually,
that crop deaths are impossible to get rid of entirely. So
maybe
if
not.
that's the
Maybe
case,
not. Maybe
okay.
I'm trying to kind of looking at it, kind of going out on a limb and saying maybe not. The reason I say that, this is extreme, of course, to think, okay,
Mhm.
well, we can stop producing bread, rice, we can stop growing vegetables and planting trees and things of that sort. That's an extreme. However, we know that we can, because obviously, because the thing is, I don't want to go down the route of saying, well, vegans eat plant-based stuff, and when plants get kind of mowed and cut up and so on, there's several insects on them. That's a different story. The reason I say that, because that does come to the point where you have to kind of eat something, because the survival instincts of a human being will come in. If you're not eating meat, if you're not eating bread, things of that sort that are pleasure, then obviously it's a whole thing. But you have to eat something, I suppose. Otherwise, you result to just kind of plucking your own grass at your back garden, kind of thing. So, but the as you say, I think the issue that I remain with is, of course, yes, we can reduce crop production. I mean, we know realistically we can't get rid of it. However,
well, that's not my question. My question is, do you agree that crop deaths are impossible to eliminate?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So if crop deaths are impossible to eliminate, the best we can do is to reduce them as much as possible, correct?
Right, yeah.
Okay, great. So we're on the same page. So because we are not able to even fulfill achieving the good for these animals, the best we can do is to reduce it as much as possible. Now, eating meat, the animals are eating crops. So the cows, the chickens, the pigs, all of those animals are eating crops. And the amount of crops that are grown for them is massive. Like 1/3 of the arable land on the earth is used for growing crops for animals.
Yeah.
If we were to eliminate eating animals for food, we would eliminate all of those crop deaths. So if vegans are guilty for the crop deaths for bread, then meat eaters would be guilty for the crop deaths for bread, plus the deaths of the animals for their food, plus the crop deaths for the animals that they eat for food. So the numbers are like way higher for the non-vegans than it is for the vegans. So we've already granted that we can't eliminate crop deaths entirely. The best we can do is reduce them as much as possible. The vegan diet does that. It achieves this good that we take to be a moral obligation if we're going through the consequentialist route here.
Right. Yeah. No, I do agree with that for sure. With regards to where you can reduce it as much as possible, you can reduce the mistreating and killing of animals in whatever size they are, etc. I 100% agree with that. I've never had an issue with that at all. The thing is with me, because what I kind of say is, okay, so because we know a lot of vegans, you'll agree with this, is maybe even 99% of vegans, they would put a cow's life over a spider's. We know this is the truth. Like this is reality, right?
Sure.
We know this.
Like the sentient hierarchy.
Right, yeah, a hierarchy. Exactly. So that's what I kind of think. Well, why does a cow have more of a right than a spider in terms? Because as I say, the reason I say this is because, as I asked you, well, is it eating bread for you pleasure? Is it a pleasure for you? And you say yes, of course it is, as it would be for me if I was not a meat eater. And of course, eating meat is a pleasure for me. That's the issue I have with veganism, with what it stands for. Because the argument, I agree 100%. I emphasize again that reduction is a big point, of course, absolutely. However, I still I'm not convinced on the point of why can when we know and we know these insects and small animals are dying within the crop production, and we are eating bread for pleasure purposes, just like, yes, of course, you're not directly grabbing the animals or doing what you're doing, etc. But it's just like me going to a supermarket, seeing steak there, or going to a restaurant and buying steak, knowing that this cow or whatever it is, sheep, lamb, was maybe potentially tortured, mistreated, or whatever the case is, right? And I'm eating it. So technically, we can even talk about, we can say, well, that is immoral. Really, I mean, if you know, okay,
Well, but we've already agreed that the obligation is different in those cases. So with the bread, it's not merely for taste pleasure, and there's also not a victim with the bread while there is for the steak. So there are mice that would die in the crop deaths, but the mouse's death is more akin to like a self-defense. Like, let me put a hypothetical to you. Let's say you have a field and you're growing wheat on this field, and there's a group of humans, and every day these humans come and they eat your wheat, and you try everything you can to stop them from eating your wheat. You build a wall, the humans tear it down. You get like robots to kind of fly overhead to scare the humans. They keep going. You try to talk to them, they won't listen. You try to reason with them everything you can. Nothing changes. Absolutely nothing changes. These humans continue to come. And then you start to move to different tactics of like putting bitter tasting things on the wheat to prevent the humans from going there. They keep eating it. And this goes on and on and on and on. And so we can infer that this pattern of behavior is going to continue, and you cannot stop them from violating your property, violating your food that you're growing for yourself. In that case, where this human cannot be reasoned with, cannot be stopped, do you have a right to now stop them from eating your food?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, of course, absolutely. But that's where we go back to where you also said, well, humans have rational thinking.
Mhm.
We have emotions. We have a brain that's programmed, created for us to have rational thinking and to know what we're doing. Whereas mice, their life is to be within environments like that for survival purposes as well.
Right.
I would never agree that a human can turn around and say, well, it's self-defense purposes, because we are doing this for purpose of food, and it's self-defense because mice or whatever insects it is destroying our crop. And I completely disagree with that because, as I say,
Well, hold on. You said that it was self-defense for the human, but why is it self-defense? Because the human can rationalize. But if an animal lacks the ability to rationalize, it's no longer self-defense. Does that mean that if a bear who cannot rationalize and attacks me and kills me, it's not self-defense for me to kill the bear back?
No, because you have the rational thinking to kill.
Right. So the rational thinking that I have gives me what Judith Thomson calls a power right.
Right.
The ability to legislate rights.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So
I agree with that.
Right. So in this example of the crop deaths, I have a right to defend my crops against things that are rational or not rational.
Are you defending the crops for humans or for larger animals such as cows and sheep, etc.?
Sorry, I missed that. Do you mind repeating that again?
Are you defending? Are you, obviously you're talking about self-defense because they are destroying the crops, etc. Are you doing that for other animals who consume crops such as cows and sheep, etc., or are you doing it for humans?
Well, in this case, it would be for humans. But the point here is to highlight the obligations we have, the rights we have, and then if we're failing some moral duty with crop deaths, but we aren't failing in these moral duties that we take to be obligations, although it would be morally good to prevent them and reduce them.
Yeah, no, I as I said, I'm all for, and I'm completely on board with regards to the reduction, but
yeah.
I believe consistency is key with pretty much everything, you could say, to an extent. Obviously, you can't have consistency with everything, but I mean, pretty much you can try at least. But my point being is, I mean, for example, if I personally turn around as a meat eater, as I say, and I say, well, I believe a frog's life is either equal or is higher than a cow's life, would that be wrong or right of me?
Well, we didn't quite touch on the sentience hierarchy, but what would make it wrong or right would be the reasons you're giving for that animal having a certain value or not. So it's not just like a whim that a person would say frogs have more moral value than the cow. It's contingent on something. There's some reason grounding it. So when a vegan is saying that like a cow has more moral consideration than say this field mouse, there are a few things that are grounding that. Like one reason would be that the experience of the cow is taken to be potentially richer than the mouse. Of course, we can't know that with 100% certainty, so we have to use some inferences there to get to that conclusion based on the brain structure, the behavior that the animal has, etc. And so we would compare those things and we would make this judgment of, okay, it seems to be the case that the cow has a richer experience. They have best friends. They can have things that appear like depression, etc. Mice also have some things like that as well, but it doesn't seem to be the case that it's as rich for the mouse as it is for the cow. So that's one thing that could ground it. Another thing that grounds the moral behavior is the cow is something that we created, we're farming it, we're doing all of these things. So now we have a relationship with the cow. And when you build this relationship with a creature, you have responsibilities towards that. We do not have responsibilities towards things we don't have this relationship to, in the same way that we do something we have a relationship with. So as the creator of this situation, we have different obligations. So we do have obligations to achieve the good for the cow, while we don't have obligations to achieve the good for the mouse.
Right. I mean, I agree with that, but obviously you also know majority of the cases all the time, cows, rebirth of birth of lambs and calves and stuff like that, they're for the purpose of dairy or meat from a lot of farmers. Not everyone, I'm sure, but a lot of farmers. So the responsibility, I think that could be kind of to an extent subjective, because on a vegan standpoint, it's going to be, well, you created it, you so on. We're not literally created, but you caused it to be created, and now you have a duty upon that cow to give it life, to give it its rights. We're talking about obviously morality again.
Not just, but we have a duty to achieve goods for them. So when we create a creature and we enter a relationship with that creature, we then have duties to achieve goods for them. Like if I have a pet, now I have obligations that are positive for the pet, like providing comfort for the pet, making sure that it's given adequate nutrition, all of these things. So when I enter this relationship with another creature that would be an end that I take to have this moral consideration, now I have positive duties towards them. But when I do not have that relationship with them, I don't have these positive duties of achieving the good for them. I merely have to make sure I do not violate their good.
But I don't have, I mean, obviously in cases like that, I wouldn't have a relationship with the cow, for example, or the sheep. Like, so why?
Sure. So
why
when I say we, I mean humanity.
Okay, yeah. Sure. Well, yeah, I thought, for example, then, so okay, so I don't have a relationship with at all, and I don't think humans really, realistically, we know it's highly doubtful. Maybe 1 in a million has a relationship with a let's talk about the most obscure animal. Let's just even say a tiger or a panther or something. Okay, well, majority of the humans, I said 1 in a million maybe, has a relationship with a panther or a tiger, but the majority don't. Where do we go? For example, if I said I wanted to have some panther meat or tiger meat, where do we go in regards to obligation and morality with that in that terms? Because there's no relationship at all.
So just so it's clear, the relationship aspect is what gives us our positive duties towards these creatures. Meaning, when you enter a relationship with an animal, now you have duties to achieve good for the animal. But when you are not in a relationship with that animal, you do not have that duty to achieve the good for them. However, we do have duties to not use the animal as merely a means to our ends, which means we cannot hunt the tiger, but we do not have an obligation to provide the tiger with comforts and food and all of this stuff.
Right. Okay, but I mean, yeah, I mean, you kind of, yeah. No, I like that, because I've not actually heard such an answer in terms of that, because as I said, it's always trying to justify one with another. Whereas with that, obviously talking about obligations towards certain animals and for what reasons, for example, as you said, relationships and so on. Yes, that's obviously a completely different story, and I completely 100% agree with that. But as I say, for example, I mean, to be fair, I'm quite kind of lost for words in terms of what I would like to, I suppose, argue on that point, because yeah, I mean, but the thing is, as I said, I think it's more. I think, but that's I think that's where the maybe it's a subjective thing where individuals, majority, unfortunately, within veganism, individuals kind of don't have the understanding or the opinion similar to what you've just had, I suppose, which is because majority of the vegans, and I'm sure you've probably come across some, it's just the same thing, which is what we're kind of taught in society, which is, well, cows we shouldn't eat, this animal we shouldn't eat, but this animal's okay, referring to insects and small animals like frogs, etc. And I mean, we don't take a second thought to crush a spider sometimes. We don't take a second thought because we think, oh my God, that's a spider, let's crush it. Oh my God, that's a rat, let's put poison out and kill it. And there's never a second thought to that. I mean, to be fair.
Yeah, this kind of brings me to an interesting point. So there were these two statisticians named David Wolfson and Marion Sullivan, and they went through and they looked at like the number of animals that are killed in farming. And so what they found that in the United States, people who hunt animals and trap animals and animals that are killed in shelters, animals that are used for research and all of these things for fur trade, they only come up to about 218 million. That's wild animals, and then this small section of animals that are used in research and things like that. 218 million. The number of animals that are dying in farming is 9.5 billion in the United States alone. So when you compare the number of animals that are farmed with the number of animals that are in the wild and killed, the animals that are alive in farming conditions will end up accounting for something, according to them, end up accounting for 98% of all animals. So if we can get rid of all of the harm for 98% of all animals, then we are achieving a massive good in the world. Would you agree?
I mean, to an extent, yeah, because I was reading something
similar.
Well,
hold on. You said to an extent, but I want to push you here. 98% of animals, to an extent. If someone were to tell me 98% of something, I'm going to start calling that all. That's close enough for me to start using all. If 98% of humans had this one thing, I'm close to calling that all humans. So when you say to an extent, I'm going to bristle at that a little bit. 98%, that's a huge amount.
Right.
That's like if we're capable of saying 98% equals all, then we can eliminate all the animal suffering for our moral obligations by eliminating farming of animals.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I still stand by the to an extent. The reason I say that because I don't agree that 98% would always be all. That depends again on the person and how they see it. And of course, that is the large majority, and it's almost all.
Sure.
However,
I mean, I'm asking you though. I'm asking you though. But if we said 98% of humans had this one feature, we would say all humans have that feature. I mean, there are things we say all humans have that probably have lower statistics than that.
I mean, I think because I've never heard. I mean, I personally, when percentages like 98% is used, it's used for a reason. Rather than just saying, oh, I mean, we can just start off by just saying, well, everyone has this or everyone has that.
Right. My point is, when we say all, we rarely mean 100%.
No, of course.
All is kind of this word referring to a vast majority, and 98% is vast majority. There's always going to be like at least one where it's not the case.
But this is it goes down to so with regards to that, Of course, one of the big kind of values within and beliefs within veganism is that animals have just as much of a right. I know this goes back to going to the obligations, etc., as well, a bit as well.
Yeah.
But personally speaking, I still think that with regards to that, to eliminate, not eliminate, I suppose to an extent actually to eliminate certain that 2% almost by just saying because it's 98%, that's it. I mean, that's pretty much everyone or every animal, then we're good. Yes, of course, that is a reduction, a huge amount, and that is a great thing. But as I say, I still believe why are we not counting the 2%? Because imagine if it was human beings, for example. Let's imagine it was human beings. We know realistically, of course, 100% animals have the right to live 100%. However, my on with regards to animals and human beings, we are higher on the ladder, I believe. But that doesn't mean we can justify our eating for animals for the sake of just eating animals because we like the taste or whatever the case is. But yeah, the 2%, that's what I'm saying. If it was human beings, would we just discount those 2%? Would we just disregard them? We wouldn't do that because it's a completely different story when it comes to humans. Of course,
No,
some
that's
people
not
may
necessarily
disagree.
true, actually. That's not necessarily true. For example, when we look at like vaccinations or medicines, when we look at the risk, there's a certain threshold for the safety of the risk, and it's around 98%, 99% safe. There's that small amount of risk, around 1% to 2%, that we accept because of the good it does for humanity. So we do accept risk like that there's going to be a small percentage of the population who will have this adverse effect from taking medicine, but the benefit outweighs the risk there. We do that with humans.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, there's a risk in everything we do in life. I mean, if you don't take a small risk, then I mean, where do you'll be stuck for the rest of your life? But
which is not to
the
say,
thing is,
which is not to say that 2% are unimportant. They are important, but there are good reasons for us to do these things. There are good reasons for us to do the vaccine where that 2% might have that harm. There are good reasons for us to have this medicine where that 2% might be harmed. So it's not just empty or floating out there with no justification. We have good reasons, all things considered, to do it.
Right. I mean, of course, I mean, we're not living in a fantasy world. We know we live in a reality where, unfortunately, things are going to happen that are going to be negative impact on the world and people themselves. But again, like the issue that I will kind of, and don't get me wrong, what you've said, I do appreciate, I do respect, and also I do understand. And I mean, a lot of it I do agree with, to be fair. So, and there's parts of it that I will go away and think about it again and just let it process. Think, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. It's still kind of bugging me with a point, not bugging me in the sense of like, oh my god, I'm going to get annoyed at this or something like that, but just more, it's in the back of my head where it's still the fact that I believe, like, for example, if I sat here and said, I believe how could, for example, as I say, like, I believe that moral duty, obligation, or whatever the case is, at the end of the day, I believe, because veganism is vegan, animals, we don't wear animals, and we don't, etc., etc. But if it's for certain things, we can do this and we can do that, and that's where I believe the discrepancies come in, and the inconsistencies, where it kind of makes me question veganism due to that reason, because I'm thinking, okay, fine, I can appreciate you don't have a relationship with this animal. I can appreciate you don't have this obligation towards this animal and they are harming the crops, etc. However, this is what they know. This is their life, remember. As I say, like mice, insects, flies, these things, this is their home. Like to be in plants and to be within soil and under mud, etc. This is their life. This is their home. And we destroy that for crop purposes
and for animal agriculture. If we move away from animal agriculture, we can rewild the crops that are grown for animals. So let's go back to that 98%. So 98% of the animals are in farms. Now, out of that 98%, the animals outside that are dying, more of them are dying for the crop deaths to feed that 98%. So in that 2%, more of the deaths are coming to feed that 98%. And so if we get rid of the 98%, then we would also reduce the deaths in the 2%. So we've done an even greater good by getting rid of farming animals and not eating them. So if we're going on these consequences, we achieve the good by getting rid of eating animal products from farms. And even that mouse in the field, fewer of them are going to die from crop deaths if we move away to an all plant-based diet. I mean, if we move towards an all plant-based diet.
So it's a matter of.
So I appreciate that you're interested in the suffering of those animals. And so I would encourage you, if you are truly interested in their suffering, the best diet to support that would be a plant-based one. And of course, there are plant-based products that are not good for that. Like we can talk about palm oil. It's a plant-based product, but the production of palm oil is absolutely dreadful.
No, don't get me wrong. Like, obviously, as you say, so it is like, of course, it's a big part of the environment that plays a big part within it, and as you said, animal agriculture as well. So, in terms of if you unfortunately have to kill the minority for the majority, you're going to do that. That's just the way things are. To make the world keep going, of course. So. That point, to be fair, I can agree with 100%. And yes, again, yes, we live in this country, you live in that country, and we do have the privilege to be vegans. So it's not a matter of, as long as, because the thing is, I have heard, and again, this is individuals, I'm not basing this around the whole belief and values of veganism. It is mainly individuals where they do talk about veganism, about the whole world and how this country needs to be vegan, this country needs to be vegan. Of course, we're not going to go, as I said, we're not going to go to like Gambia or something and start telling them become a vegan. They'll be like, it's not going to work for their work lifestyle, and of course their diet and health, really, because that's what their body's about now. I can 100%. I'm 100% on board with regards to, and I agree in terms of, if we're talking UK and US and we're talking what you're saying, then 100%. Of course, I do agree with the environment and the agriculture part of things worldwide. But in terms of certain countries, but that's not a point that anyone's really making. No, I completely agree, and I think you have, to be fair, you have been the first person to kind of really make me think, you know what, actually, that does make sense. And if I didn't have a religion which says I can eat meat for reasons where it's not really pointless to get into, because of course it's a different story, I would give up meat right now. I'll be honest, because you have convinced me in that term, in the sense of.
Great.
Yeah,
may I ask what religion you follow?
I'm a Muslim, so Islam.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think as I understand it, being vegan is not forbidden by Islam.
No.
Yeah, so you can, those things are totally compatible. You can be vegan and also be a Muslim, and I will say, so correct me if I'm wrong, I also understand that Muslims do agree that the Torah was given by Allah, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so so the story of Genesis, the story of Adam and Eve, and all those things, you guys accept that as being what God did?
Yeah.
Right. So are you familiar with the idea that in the Garden of Eden, man was vegan?
Yes. Well,
okay, cool.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So in the Garden of Eden, they were vegan. They didn't kill any animals. It was only after the flood that they were given permission to eat animals. And when they were given permission to eat animals, God said to them, you must not eat animals with the blood still inside of them. because the blood was seen as where the soul was contained. So the whole point there being that like the soul had to be gone. The life force had to be gone from the animal before you could eat them.
Right.
And I think that was, just putting on that hat, that theistic hat, that's God's way of saying like, there is a suffering there that the animal has and it's important. And it's my creation, and so we should respect it. Now, if God created this perfect world where man was vegan, and if God has this consideration for the animal's experience, then I would say that you would be living in accord with God's will by being vegan, because you would be considering those facts.
Right. I mean, the thing is, within Islam, I'll be honest, it's actually, I mean, I don't know, are you Jewish? Are you Christian?
I grew up in a Christian setting.
Okay, so yeah, the Torah is given by the same God, as is the Psalms, as is the Bible, and obviously the Quran as well. In Islam, veganism would be something that's actually encouraged. Obviously not mandatory, but it's encouraged. Why is it encouraged? Because our belief within the animal's rights is very different to what probably people probably do think. Obviously, we're talking like historically, and to this day, like horses are used for certain. They were used in war, things of that sort. Camels for transport, and that's still used to an extent within the deserts. But that I don't think doesn't really exist anymore. But in terms of veganism, yeah, absolutely. Animals' rights. We believe that animals, before we do slaughter the animal, I mean, kosher and halal meat is the exact same. It's cut same. The prayer's pretty much the same thing as well. Yes, the blood has to be completely bled out. The animal has to be completely bled out. It can't be a spot of blood in there, kind of thing. It needs to be made sure that the animal is not killed in front of another animal. It needs to be taken away, a million miles away, in its own hut, kind of thing, and killed there where it's not in pain. Because a lot of people think, so the jugular vein, of course, biology, we know that the jugular vein, once someone cuts that, you're gone. You're bled out within 3 to 4 seconds as a human being. And animals die within max about 7 seconds, if I remember correctly. Chickens within like 2 seconds. So the animal rights that we have within Islam for these animals are to do that. You cannot mistreat them. If they are mistreated, even for 1 split second, it cannot be halal. It cannot. That's how much it is. So that's the reason I say veganism is absolutely encouraged in Islam. There's many Muslims that are vegans, more and more becoming vegans. I used to be a vegetarian for 3 weeks, right? I tried it.
Yeah.
It was difficult. I'm not going to deny. That's why I have the utmost respect for, especially for my partner, to see that she eats what she does. And again, 99% of the time I do eat, other than dairy products, I do eat vegan products. And to be fair, the food is pretty darn good, I'll be honest.
Nice.
And that's so Islam absolutely encourages it, and it's 100%. As I say, I'm not one to kind of be one of these emotional meat eaters and turn around and say, "No, you are wrong. I don't care." This and that. Absolutely, I would. I've always been open-minded to veganism and vegetarianism. It's just I've not been convinced enough in terms of what we've just discussed. And truthfully, you have convinced me, and you have kind of pushed me over the fence. So I appreciate that. Absolutely, I appreciate that, because I have been stuck on that. Thank you for that, I suppose. I will definitely, I suppose, try veganism. At least challenge myself.
Awesome.
Definitely challenge myself. Yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. I appreciate it. And if you have questions on like strategies or ways to go, you said your partner's vegan, so I'm sure they can help you out. But if you have any questions like on recipes or foods, and even within veganism, like I said, there are some plant products that are better than others. And I personally try to eat plant products with that in mind. So like, I won't consume palm oil, even though I would say that palm oil is an animal product. So I'm fine saying that, like, just definitionally, we could say something with palm oil would be vegan. But I don't eat it. I don't consume it myself, and I don't buy products with it. So if you are interested in like specific vegetable products to eat that would have this lower reduction, I'm happy to share with them. Like one really easy one is lentils. Lentils are like a super, they're amazing. Lots of protein, lots of fiber. And in order for them to create the seed, they have to be in an environment where they don't flower, meaning they grow better in conditions that are really hard for other plants to grow in, like desert conditions. So they're really great on the environment. They don't require a lot of water. So they're a wonderful, wonderful thing to eat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, as I say, my partner being vegan, we like chickpeas and lentils, and there are substitutes to kind of obviously meat and dairy stuff like that. So we have like plant-based sausages, plant-based chicken burgers and things of that sort. And don't get me wrong, some of the vegan food I've tried is actually better than non-vegan food. So
nice.
yeah, don't get me wrong. As I said, I'm a super open-minded person, and I've just struggled with this issue that I've been in my head for so many years now. Since, I don't know, how long have you been a vegan?
I've been a vegan for about a year, and before that I was a vegetarian for 2 years.
Okay. Yeah, because obviously, veganism is more and more exposed, and it's more and more talked about, so more and more people becoming vegan. So that's where it started getting to me, and I was thinking, why? So I started obviously reading up on it, and then that's where the insects and the crops, etc., that came into play. But I think you make a great point with regards to the environment. That's where I do like, because I think I was talking to Vegan Tot. I think he's listening, and he talked about ethics, environment, and health. Environment and health. Health is obviously a personal choice. Environment, on board with it, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be the generation after us and after us that are going to be living in this world. And as I said, you've convinced me with regards to the ethical part of things as well. And that was my main issue. So
awesome.
Yeah, glad to hear it. Brilliant. I've enjoyed it. Thank you for that. As I say, really enjoyed it. My first time on this app debating. I think it was a good one.
I think it was great. It was a lot of fun. I really appreciated the conversation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that as well. Thank you for obviously keeping an open mind, being mature, because some people can get too emotional, unfortunately. But yeah, absolutely. I think this is great. Definitely going to give it a go. I'll still be within us on this app, and I can kind of like drop a couple updates with regards to my vegan challenge.
Yeah, please.
And obviously, if I need any advice, recipes, etc., as you mentioned, that'd be great. But yeah, that'd be great. For sure, I'll give it a go from tomorrow, and yeah, keep you updated.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Thank you.
Appreciate it. But you just to clarify before we go, you're good for me to use this for my YouTube channel?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. You made me potentially into a vegan, so right. So, but no, that's cool. I appreciate that then. But yeah, I'll let you go. And you clearly won the debate. It wasn't really. It was a very good discussion, good conversation, I think. And it's not even a matter of win or loss. It's a matter of you've kind of given me the right information I was looking for. I think so yeah, cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. And also I appreciate you being reasonable and hearing these arguments and all of that. That was really cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely, for sure. But yeah, keep in touch, and I'll keep you updated, and we'll speak soon.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, great debate, guys. Thank you both.